Hello, my name is Dr. Janet Crosier, and I want to thank you for tuning into this presentation and invite you here to the 18th International Conference of New Directions in the Humanities. Sad that we're not together in Venice, but we are together virtually. My presentation deals with silenced voices, remembering voices lost. It's primarily dealing with women's voices that have been silenced over the centuries, actually, and are now coming to be heard more through them stepping forward and showing their power, but also through memoirs, which have been written for a long time, but have really become popular over the last few years. So I hope to share with you some pictures I've taken, as well as bits and pieces from a couple sections of memoir that I've written. Part of this material was given in a previous presentation last summer. It was different, but it was similar. This is a picture there. It was called Silence Voices, Remembering Voices Lost as well. And it was the Modern Language Association and their international conference in Lisbon, Portugal. And I had the privilege of attending their, excuse me. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of pictures. And there are just a couple. This is ones that I took in Lisbon. As you can see, this is one of the palaces. I believe they have three. Very, very colorful. This is just a picture. It's way up high in a mountain. And this is the shoreline, somewhat northwest of the center of Lisbon. Really beautiful. So the abstract for this presentation, similar to the one in Lisbon, says, for centuries, women have been forced into doing things they had no intention of ever doing. Things that brought them great pain mentally, sometimes physically, and most often emotionally. Their voices were silenced, buried, hidden, and considered to be of no value. Nothing could be further from the truth. Recently, I read a memoir that started with a woman's childhood, as many memoirs do. And then speaking with a close friend, she suggested that I begin my memoir with where I am now as an adult, and then fill in as much of my past as I felt was appropriate. I really like that idea. So that's where I'm going to start. I am the mother of 3 children and the grandmother of 2. My daughter, who has my 2 grandsons, and that is the second person in from the left as you are viewing it, has a master's degree in theater and dance. Her twin sister, sitting to the left of her, has a bachelor's degree in theater and psychology and is currently pursuing a master's degree in project management, which she should have finished this summer. My only son, who is sitting next to me, has 2 master's degrees, one in history and one degree in education, and next to him is his girlfriend. But these 3 children are my success story. They're my legacy. And here are my grandchildren, Ulysses and Atticus. At least a year ago, I believe it was their Easter celebration. So I do have a doctorate in education in 19th century British literature that focuses on the writing of Emily Bronte. And it has been my privilege to share my research at more than 8 European academic conferences and several conferences in the United States as well. But for many years, my voice had been silenced, but no more. In the past, I was trained to be afraid of men, fearful of doing something that is something that a man might consider not fit for a woman to handle. I had been brainwashed into believing that men were the only ones who could think, the only ones who could make the right decisions. The ones who knew it all, had all the answers, were there to tell women what to do, that women needed these men to tell them what they could and could not do. Well, where could such little self-worth have originated? Who had trained me so well? An earlier memoir piece sheds some light on this, and this may not be exactly the same slide that you are seeing. Some of the slides match exactly what I'm saying, and others are just there for you to look at. But in this quote, it says everything was just black and white in my house. Things were either the right to do or they were wrong. There was no questioning. If you questioned something, then the question must be wrong. If you wondered why other people had money and you did not, why other families went on vacation and ours did not, why other people had lots of friends and we had none, well, that's just the way it was the way it was meant to be. You didn't question, didn't wonder, didn't long for things you couldn't have. If you did not have something, well, that was just your lot in life. After all, there were those who had and those who did not. Those who were rich and those who were poor. Those who were pretty and those who were plain. Those who were thin and those who were fat. Those who were served and those who did the serving. There was nothing you could do if your lot was to be one of the servants, one of the poor, the plain, the fat, the shy, the unpopular. It was your fate, your place in life, and you had better accept it. I often pondered whether or not other people dared to question their lots in life. It didn't seem that way to me at 10 years old, just as it did not seem that way at 5 years old and would not at 15 or 20 either. I would never be rich, never be favored with beauty or popularity. I was meant to serve. I had no idea why, but my mother trained me well to serve, to treat everyone else as better than I was, more important than I was. She let me believe that other people deserved to be happy, deserved to be pretty or rich or popular. Evidently, I did not deserve such things. This idea of having to accept one's lot in life led me to make some very unfortunate decisions in my life. It made me accept things I didn't have to. It let me settle for little when I could have had so much more. Maybe my mother had been trained by her own mother to accept her station in life. Maybe she was just passing on her heritage as she understood it. Maybe my mother too had been afraid to ask if other people thought of life. When I was around the age of 7, my mother started studying the Bible. Unfortunately, my mother then joined a very fundamentalist, almost cult-like religious group. At the age of 12, I was forced to leave behind birthdays, Christmas, and all family ties involving non-believers. This included all my aunts, uncles, grandparents, and cousins. Over the next few years, I learned that this also meant leaving behind all my personal dreams. The church said higher education was dangerous. It would only lead a good Christian astray. I gave up my dream for college. Even though I had graduated valedictorian in my class, gone was my dream of teaching as well. With all these dreams dissolved, the desire to write was now put on a shelf. It must be forbidden as well, since no faithful churchgoer had ever dared to write a book of fiction. I had given up all my interests, all my goals, all of myself to follow the guidelines of what I had believed to be a God-fearing organization. It was the same organization that said I needed to marry a man who, although always remaining in good standing with the church, became abusive within days of our wedding. As a small excerpt from the adult portion of my memoir states, I had been married to a man who I believe truly hated me. He was abusive, insulting, and filled with anger both towards me and my 3 children. I discovered on my honeymoon what a big mistake I'd made marrying him, but it was too late. At that time, I belonged to a fundamentalist religion, which meant I also belonged to my husband. I was his property. Marriage was for a life no matter what, unless, of course, your mate was to kill you first. I quickly learned how to control his anger most of the time. I developed the necessary submissive attitude, made my husband look wonderful to the outside world, and endured as the church told me I must. A great void now entered my life. I filled it the only way I could see possible. I dedicated my life to the church. The next 6 years were spent as a full-time evangelist. This was not an easy task for an introvert who only felt free while being someone else on stage. I struggled through, though, even marrying when and whom the church told me. My life was taken out of my hands once again. I was married to a man I barely knew. Dating had been forbidden, and I had spent 3 of the 4 months of our engagement nearly 1,000 miles away in full-time ministry. The next 19 years I spent enslaved to an uncaring, controlling church and married to an abusive husband. So I shared with you a little bit of an excerpt from this memoir called A Year in the Life of Me, but I want to share just a little bit. As it says on the slide, I think there are 2 ways to begin telling the story of a year in one's life. At least that seems true for me. I could say the year was 1991, the place a small town in western Massachusetts. Okay. Another choice might be I was a single mother, even though I was married and living with the father of my children. They're both true. I did live in Massachusetts that year, and I had always felt like a single parent. It was me who took my girls to dance lessons, softball, and play rehearsals. Me who took my son to bowling lessons one summer and karate the next fall. There were no grandparents, no aunts and uncles, no cousins. There was no father, only a man who had been a part of my children's births, and little more. A year in the life of me, a time of regrets. No matter what I call my story, it still reflects a year filled with the deepest regrets, while bursting with the greatest strength and the most right decision of my life. It was never the decision I questioned. It was more the steps I chose to accomplish my decision that bother me so even now. No one truly knows what he or she would actually do the second time around. That year's done and past. It can never be recalled and thankfully will never be relived. Well, eventually, I had to reveal to my husband the fact that one of our girls had been assaulted. And his reaction was exactly what I had expected. Therefore, the picture of the cemetery was as if we were dead, to him and to the church. After screaming at me that it was all my fault that she'd been assaulted, he told me 2 things that are just totally unforgivable. First, he said that any woman who was raped had asked for it. He was speaking about his own child. And secondly, he told me about an incident in high school when he had raped a teenage girl. He felt totally justified. She deserved it, he said. I was horrified. I'd been married to a rapist for nearly 19 years and never knew. I felt that my family was no longer safe. Life with my husband was becoming close to unbearable. One of my daughters and I had been performed in a small local community theater, and he hated that. And he treated the children worse than ever. I had to quit my part-time job in order to be around to make sure the children were safe from him. And I gave up any ideas of happiness for me. I just needed to protect my children. If I could save him from this man, even if it meant sacrificing myself, it would all be all right. Whatever I had been doing up until this time to guard my children was no longer enough. I approached the church elders, but they only told me what a bad Christian woman I was because I didn't attend their church meetings regularly. When I told them that I needed help, no one would listen. During this time, a close friend of my daughter's and I committed suicide, and it was at his funeral that a friend we had made during the play that we performed in asked what I was getting out of my marriage. And this quote from the memoir says, "The end of a friend's life marked the beginning of mine." I remember sitting with Carol and May later that day as Carol told her that my husband had said I should be finished being sad about our friend who died. He was very angry with me for crying and said I had no business being sad, which is when she asked me what I was getting out of the marriage, and I had to reply, nothing. Her very simple question was, well, then why don't you leave? No one had ever asked me that before. My religious upbringing said you just don't do that sort of thing. Divorce is as big a sin as murder and totally unforgivable. I knew that if I ever left my husband, it would be the start of endless trouble for me. trouble from the church and from my entire family, but eventually it would come to mean the complete loss of my family and of the church friends I'd known all my life, those people who were supposed to be my spiritual family. I was now dead as far as they were concerned. It was this death, however, which made possible my future rebirth. This year in the life of me, this year of regrets, left me struggling to discover the answer to a very difficult question. How do you start over from nothing? Much of that experience is presented in this original story. It's a parable or a metaphor telling my story. And the story, of course, is called Caged, which you're welcome to receive a copy of. Here are just a couple of quotes from that story. It starts just a little farther. You can make it. Charity heard these words over and over in her mind, her head pounding from the bruises that disfigured her face, lips swollen and purple. Every inch of her body was either scratched or beaten until it had become grotesque, something beyond human recognition. Charity was human, though, and she was alive. She must concentrate on that, just being alive. Her foot caught on a root across the path, and she felt her body crash to the earth, branches grabbing at her tender flesh. Sobs caught in her throat, then echoed forth into the still black night. No one was there to hear. So as the previous slide had shown a cage, that is exactly what happened to Charity as a metaphor or parable. She was physically put inside that cage by the village elders, who are also the church elders, and kept there and for all the women to see so that they would learn a lesson of what happened to you if you ever disobeyed a man or disobeyed the church. So I thank you for listening to this. I hope it made some sense since it was a little bit scattered perhaps, but I wanted to share with you how voices can be lost in the past and perhaps even in the present time, because of either male domination, church domination, society's domination, but by becoming ourselves and putting our words out there, whether it's in a memoir, whether they're spoken at a virtual presentation such as this one or a live conference presentation, they represent our future. So again, I want to thank you. I am Dr. Janet Crosier. I have put my email address up on the screen to say if anyone would like a copy of the short story Cage, let me know. Just send me a message and I will get a copy to you. Also, if anyone is interested in having me do a presentation about memoir or about the idea of silenced voices that are silenced no more, you could contact me about that too, and I would be more than happy to discuss it with you.